thought we could explore some today is the whole phenomenon of what's called mega churches, but more than that, the principles behind church growth, which I assume are principles that almost any church can apply. And I know you've done some study on different sizes of churches and different personalities. What happens as a church increases its membership? How is it different?
People make the mistake of assuming that a medium-sized church is just like two small churches put together, when in point of fact, when a church gets larger, the dynamics change. That's why some churches grow to a certain level and stay at that level for years on end. They may get a little larger, but they always drop back to this same level. Generally, that's because the congregation and or the pastoral leadership of the church are comfortable with a certain style of leadership that will only take the church to a certain level of growth. Or it might be that the congregation is only comfortable with a certain size, because the dynamics change rather drastically at times when a church moves from one size to another. We have a small sheet somewhere, if we could show that in just a moment. There it is. If you'll notice, there are several different sizes of congregations listed there. This comes from Lyle Schaller, who's one of the known authorities in the field. And if you'll notice, the churches that are getting the largest press are those that are called mega churches. And those are churches with 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 a Sunday. Actually, they represent a very small percentage, probably less than 1% of the congregations in America. There are some lessons to be learned from them, however, at every stage of growth. And if you'll look at the list that is now on your screen, you'll probably find your congregation somewhere there, and there's some lessons to be learned at each one of those levels.
So not only the number of people is different, but also the personality.
Oh yes,
of the
absolutely.
group.
Yes. The smaller the church, the more focused it can be. The larger the church, the more services, the more kinds of congregations it can reach. We have found, for example, in our congregation that we don't have one congregation. We probably have at least 6 or 7 because of the multiple services that our congregation offers. Larger churches are more capable of offering multiple opportunities for people to serve and to be served. And the more options you can offer, obviously, the more people you can reach. Smaller churches, on the other hand, can focus on one particular area or one particular group or one particular neighborhood. And there is strength in that also. So it basically means that the congregation finds where they are, what they are capable of doing, and then decides to do that which they can do as best they can.
You were talking about several congregations being part of one. I wonder then if one of the big humps to get over is the whole notion that everybody knows everybody else, everybody works together. We're simply a large group. Evidently, you have to change your mindset.
Yes, you do. A while ago when the chart was up, there was a category that was called the awkward-sized church, which is, as I recall, somewhere between 140 to 200. The problem with the awkward-sized church, up to 140, you can function at a certain level. There is everybody knows everybody. One pastor is adequate. When you move past that 140 to 150 in average attendance, it really becomes too large a job for one person. You really need to start thinking about the possibility of more than one service of worship. And it is hard for a congregation that has been used to all this time, knowing everybody, knowing one pastor, everybody being in the same service, to make that jump into this new way of doing things. And they will say things like, well, why do we need 2 services? We don't fill up the room every time now, and you need 2 services to reach more people. Well, maybe we don't want to reach more people. And sometimes that comes up. But the church, if it is to be the church, is in the business of reaching people. And if that means necessarily a change in the way of doing things in order to reach more people, we need to seriously consider it.
Well, let's talk about ways of reaching people, because it's also my suspicion that there are a lot of people out there for whom traditional ways of reaching them with the faith, they aren't working. Who are some of these people out there that we might call unchurched, non-churched, and in some circles, seekers? Who are they?
Well, let me backtrack to get to your point. That's what I always end up doing. But in point of fact, for a long time, I would say up through the 50s and 60s in America, we kind of assumed that religion came with the water. We did not, everybody raised their kids in some form of religious training. I don't know that it was true then. We just assumed that it was true. Now it's relatively obvious that that is not true. In our own church, for example, it's a symptom. We have every Sunday morning, we print the Lord's Prayer in the service of worship. That used to be a given. Everybody knew the Lord's Prayer. Everybody does not know the Lord's Prayer now. Everybody does not know the 23rd Psalm. So there is a large group of people that have had no contact with the church at all. None. There's also a large group of people that became disaffected with the church maybe when they were 18 or 19 or went to college or whatever, and have never come back. Now, they may say to you, well, we're a member of such and such a denomination or such and such a religion, when in point of fact, they have not practiced that faith in years. And so they would not consider themselves unchurched. They're probably a part of that poll data that always says so many people are a member of a church. Well, they are, but they aren't. Because they haven't participated actively in years.
One of the principles then is don't assume.
Don't assume, absolutely. Don't assume that everybody who walks in the door has any kind of Christian background. Don't assume that everybody understands all the words that in many churches are accepted as regular ways of doing business, which really appear as code words to people outside the church. We started looking at our bulletin, and words like the opening music we call the prelude. Well, to someone who comes into the church who's had no experience with the church whatsoever, that immediately says to them, wait a minute, there's something going on here that I don't understand at all. And so we have, for example, changed the word prelude to opening music, which is what it is, rather than using the code words which cut people off.
So some of these people then are disaffected. Some have never been exposed to the church. And does that cut across all age categories, or is there one particular category of folks in the country?
Well, I would think that it was probably more prevalent in the boomers and younger. I would say now that, well, of course, many of the boomers are now turning 50, but it is 50 years old and younger. There is more work to be done, I think, in just basic Christian or basic religious understanding. In that age level, it was not a part of their childhood. It was not a part of their upbringing. And so some information has to be shared with them. Or they got, maybe they got angry during the 60s because of civil rights or because of the war or because of anything, and dropped out of the church and have not come back. So I would say it's probably 50 years old and younger.
Well then, if there are so many reasons for staying away from church, synagogue, mosque, wherever, why do people show up?
Well, because they have found out that there is this gnawing emptiness at the center of things. We have gone through all the other possibilities. We used to think that if we got the job, if we got the car, if we got the family in the right neighborhood, if we got the right social position, if we got the right friends, and we got all those things. I believe it was Rabbi Kushner who wrote a wonderful book with a wonderful title, When Everything You Ever Wanted Isn't Enough. Well,
right.
We have gone through everything we ever wanted, or we have seen people who have everything we've ever wanted, and we notice that their lives are just as empty. And so the question now is, okay, if this stuff doesn't work, what does? And maybe I'm not real crazy about going back to church, but I have come across some people who do, and they seem to have touch with something that I don't have touch with. And so I think people are increasingly willing to give the church a chance. But the church has to be open to where they are and not say, well, if you don't come in knowing everything we know, believing everything we believe, thinking everything we think, then we don't have any time for you. There is a chance for us to incorporate these people. And then to say, you know, how may we help you in your faith development? The churches that are doing well now, there's not a tremendous amount of literature being written about life in the church now, but the churches that are doing well are those who decide that their purpose is to reach new people, to build faith in new people, and to make new people faithful followers. That's their focus. And they're very intentional about that. They're very clear about that. And they gear their whole program, they gear all their publicity, they gear their worship, they gear their service, they gear everything to that end. And because of that, they have become wonderfully effective.
So the shift then becomes not come join us and we'll help you raise your kids and we'll do this, that, and the other once you come join us. But the shift is how can we be open to you, serve you where you are, right?
Yes, that's part. I think it's not either or, it's both. It is to say, we welcome you, we look forward to the opportunity, and here's what we can help with. Here's some things that we can help with child raising, with your own faith development, with your own spiritual journey.
And I gather from what I read that that kind of openness doesn't necessarily come attached to a denominational label.
No, it does not. As a matter of fact, in a city like Austin, you would go from one congregation to another of any, I would say, any denomination, and certainly many are represented, and you would find that some are more open than others. And a growing awareness is that we are going to, as the church, have to be more intentional about welcoming, about inviting, about reaching out to people. And not to say, come in and be just like us, but to say, come in and grow in your faith.
Okay. Let's come back to some of those in just a minute after we take a break here. We'll continue our conversation with John on Austin Faith Dialogue. Stay with us.
Serving Austin means serving you. That has always been the primary goal of Austin Metropolitan Ministries. We are religion in action through the work of these organizations. Each plays a key role in making the capital city a better place to live, but we can't do it alone. Do you have some spare time, talents, or any resources that you can share? If you do, please call AMM at 472-7627 because serving Austin means serving you.
Here on Austin Faith Dialogue today, we've been talking about new kinds of ways to grow church, to bring people into the faith. And we've been talking with John McMullen, Senior Pastor, First United Methodist Church. John, let's keep talking about some of those characteristics of how a church is different when it welcomes in new people. I think we've got a list of those kinds of characteristics. If we, there they are. Yeah. Describe those to us.
Well, first of all, this is a relatively, the name of the large pastoral church is a relatively recent phenomenon in American life. And it gets back to what I was talking about before the break, and that is a definite intentionality with a clear purpose in mind. It really does look at the people that are in the area where the church serves, and if possible, deals with those needs seriously. Now, in some places that's much easier than others. Austin, that would be very difficult because there are so many different types of people in Austin. I saw a study that said There are demographers say that there are like 53, 54 different lifestyle segments in America. 47 of them are in Austin. And the largest one of those segments is only about 17%. So there is a tremendous variety of people. So the church has to reach out to those particular types of individuals in their particular area. The other thing that, the other kinds of things that start showing up, that the church focuses beyond itself. Too often congregations become self-centered, and they say, what are the concerns that take care of my needs? Are we taken care of? Do we get visited by the pastor? Do we get visited in the hospital? Are our kids taken care of, or whatever? The focus of these larger churches now, and indeed increasingly even middle-sized and smaller churches, is to reach beyond themselves and to reclaim the vision that has been central to the church all along, and that is that we are put together
SBC
to reach out beyond ourselves to share that which is important with us. Style of leadership. The leadership now comes from pastoral staff generally. That's what is expected. It used to be that the pastor did the ministering. Now the claim is that the pastor trains the lay people, the members of the church, to do the ministering, and the pastor serves as the organizer. The pastor ministers to a group which then ministers to the larger group. Rick Warren has written a book called The Purpose-Driven Church, and in it he talks about the fact that he has a very large congregation, Saddleback Church in California, and one day he found out that one of his charter members was in the hospital. Had been with him for years. Well, Rick had not done a whole lot of hospital visitation, but he wanted to see him, so he went to the hospital. And the man was in intensive care, and the nurse said, you can't go in there. He said, but I'm the pastor, and I'm the minister. And she says, well, how many ministers do you have? I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, there have been 11 people come in to see him in the last hour. And he tried to convince her, but you don't understand, I am the minister. And she said, you people have too many ministers for an intensive care setting. But it is that idea that a change in focus that says we pay the minister to do our ministering. Now it is we pay the minister to train us to do ministry, which of course makes the church much more effective in many areas. Plus, it gives people a chance to put feet on their faith, to really live out something that they have not maybe had the opportunity in the past because they said, well, we'll let the professionals do it. Well, a lot of times in this situation, amateurs are more effective.
Well, it sounds like, too, that would provide some nice ways for people who are new to the church to enter.
Oh, absolutely.
That they don't have to be longtime members, let's say, to come dust the hymnal racks or whatever.
Well,
that people with varying talents and varying levels of skill can be ministering, right?
Yeah, and this puts to one of my pet peeves. One of the mistakes I think that the church made for years was that they assumed that people were involved in the church if they were placed on a committee. Most of our experience has been that being on a committee is not probably one of the most religious experiences we've ever had in our lives. In fact, it's probably cost some of us our religion in past times. I'm seeing in churches all across the spectrum of denomination a simplifying of structure where then people can move in and do stuff quite quickly. We had an example in our congregation for several months ago. Somebody said, I would like for this church to help resettle a refugee family. And all we said was, who was interested in doing it? We had 20 people said they were interested in doing it. We are now resettling a refugee family. It was never voted on. It was not taken through a large committee structure. We had 20 yes votes. And some people were brand new to the church. Some people that were involved in it were not even members of the church. Some were long-time members. But it was an opportunity to live out their faith. which is the way that people really get involved in
Right,
religion.
right.
They do not get involved by being put on the trustees or the finance committee. In fact, as I said, that can be detrimental at times.
Well, and I heard something different in what you just said. People who weren't even members.
Oh, yes.
That's a different notion, that you don't have to join us to be able to participate in what's going on.
Well, that's a whole change, too. I was raised in a small town in South Texas, and there was one Methodist church, one Baptist church, one Catholic church, one Church of the Nazarene, and they were all on the same street. I mean, we tried to make it as easy as possible. And if you were a Methodist or a Baptist and you moved into my hometown, you joined within the first week because that's what you did.
Mm-hmm.
What we're finding now is that people will visit a church 2, even 3, even 4 years before they commit to membership. And what will happen is they will become involved in some activity in the life of the church that makes them a part of the community. And then they will commit to the community after they become involved in it. You'll have the occasion where people will join the church wearing a choir robe, or people who have worked on resettling a refugee, or people who worked on a mission project, or people who have done something else already in the life of the church and may have been visiting. Well, the average number of visits for one joining the church now is 50. So that takes into account that some join very quickly. So I have known people that in congregations I served that visited 4 and 5 years before committing to join. One as long as 8, and when he joined, everybody assumed he had been a member forever.
So the very act of joining is not the magical moment. The magical moment is when someone commits to participation.
It is a magical moment. It is. The act of commitment of saying in front of a congregation that I wish to be a part of this in an official way is an important time. It is, actually, I think now it has more import because people do it on an informed basis. They have been involved in the life of the church. They have been serving. They have seen what it's like to be in a relationship with the other members of that community. And now, in light of my awareness, I commit.
Okay.
Well, okay. In the past it was, well, I'm in town, you're the only one that's my denomination, I've been here once and nothing bad happened, so I guess I'll join. And to me, that's not nearly the informed kind of decision that you see now.
Right, right.
I mean, we are, of course, delighted when people commit to join our congregation or any congregation, but we understand now that that's usually not an immediate decision. It's one that comes in growth.
Now, you said at the beginning that these mega churches, which involve hundreds and thousands of people, are a very small percentage.
Yes.
So probably most of the folks watching today will come from churches with much smaller numbers. How do some of these church growth principles apply to them? How can they use some of these ideas?
Well, first of all, I think the most important thing is the awareness that the function of the church is to reach out beyond itself. That's probably the prime consideration. And also the awareness that with growth are going to come changes. And to be ready for those changes. As I said, there's a tremendous amount of literature out there now. There really is not much excuse for being ignorant of the sociological kind of changes and the kind of leadership changes that will be necessary. But knowing them sometimes does not necessarily make it possible. But I would suggest to them that they start looking at where they are, read some of the literature about the characteristics of where they are, how they can best serve given the limitations and the strengths, because all church sizes have limitations and strengths. Play to their strengths, get away from their limitations. Then start looking at what growth will mean. In other words, assume, for example, a 5 or 10 or 15% growth rate over the next 2 or 3 years. What will the church look like then? What will the size be? All right, what are the characteristics of that size church? How is that different from where we are now? Because if you do not prepare to change, when you get there, you won't get there. Because it will not support the kind of growth. You know, you may get more members, but then you'll start losing people on the backside because you're simply not equipped to deal leadership-wise, organizationally, service, opportunity-wise with a very large number of people.
Okay. And one could even read some things from business, I suppose.
Absolutely.
And pick up on some principles of how businesses have creatively changed to meet a new day.
And business is taking the church very seriously. As a matter of fact, one of the courses at the Harvard Business School focused on one of the mega churches as a business study about how an organization develops. And so they're taking the church very seriously at this point.
Good. Hope we can take the church just that seriously.
Absolutely.
And I would imagine that growth principles could apply not just to folks from a Christian background, but to probably almost any faith
Absolutely.
background,
Absolutely.
as you've observed it.
I have talked to a number of rabbis, and the same kinds of things are available. It may be that most gatherings, most congregations assume a closed community. Well, there are only so many people who are interested in us. I don't know that that's necessarily true. I think that the congregation, regardless of denomination or whatever, that is open to sharing meaningful experiences with a group of people will find a ready and growing audience because there are a number of people who are definitely seeking a sense of meaning for their existence.
Right. And what a wonderful place to find it in a church that's open to that. Thank you, John, for being here, for the conversation.
My pleasure.
And we thank you for watching. Hope you're now excited about going back to your faith community and finding ways to reach out to those who are hungry for what we can offer. Thank you for joining us today on Austin Faith Dialogue.